This morning we read from verse 1. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian church. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing of joy and in their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people, and they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. Let's take a seat. Isn't that a wonderful, wonderful scripture this morning? We're in the middle of our series on finances, on money matters. And this morning, I just want to say up front again, this is not like a fundraising campaign. This is how do we walk with Jesus in every aspect of our lives? I think one of the areas that we like to kind of push aside often is the area of finances. We're very happy to talk about our prayer life and our our quiet times and my going to church and my spiritual formation. And sometimes what we do is we end up just separating the giving aspect. Because it's uncomfortable. And the reason why it's uncomfortable, I just want to kind of state this at the very beginning, and it's been mentioned before, money is a god, and that God doesn't like the God that we serve. I just want to say the God that we serve also does not like that God because it gets in the way of our worship and our devotion to Him. And so when we talk about money and everybody all of a sudden goes, "Ish," here the church goes again, talking about money, you need to understand that isn't necessarily your own thought. That is the God, Mammon, trying to get into our heads because Mammon knows that God is bigger and stronger and more powerful and deserves everything. And so many of us today walk around giving our full devotion to God except in the area of our finances. And so it becomes a tricky subject. In fact, we all know, hey, we've all heard the stories. Churches either abuse it or churches don't even talk about it. So we believe here in this church that this is such an important part of our lives because it reveals the heart, doesn't it? It reveals the heart. Many people have said, I don't know who actually came up with this because I think it's been used so many times. Show me your wallet and it'll show me your heart. Your wallet reveals your heart. It reveals your heart. Your subscriptions that you're paying for reveals what we are, what we like. So this morning we're going to get into this. And so I want to just do a little bit of an exercise with us this morning. We're going to do some deductive reasoning because this is a very smart group of people here this morning. So I thought we'll do some deductive reasoning. So we're going to just go from the beginning. Okay, so what is God? 1 John 4 verse 8 tells us that God is love. Everyone say God is love. 1, 2, 3, God is? Cool. And then if John 3:16 tells us, what does God do? He gives. For He so loved the world that He gave. So number one, God is love. And number two, we can say that God gives. And so if God is love and God gives, we can use some deductive reasoning and we can say love gives. Now just think about that significant other in your life. You cannot love without giving. You cannot give well without love. I met this incredibly beautiful woman in 2013. I hope that date is correct. It is correct. Yes. 2013. And I just knew I had to give. I just wanted to give. So our Valentine's Day does so well because people just want to give their significant other something, don't they? Or you're with your friends, you just want to give of your time and you want to hang out with them. When you love something, you want to give to that something. That's a reality. And so I kind of did some sneaky WhatsApp messaging and I was because she had no idea. When I say she had no idea, she had capital N-O idea that I had seen her and I was chasing. She had no idea that she was being chased. Therefore, it made it a little bit easier because I caught her quickly. And I asked her, I was like, okay, cool, this is so corny, guys. You can use this because it's going to work well. Okay, cool. So just quickly, a little WhatsApp message. We did speak on the phone. It wasn't one of those virtual things, but just to clarify. So I was like, okay, cool. So just kind of, what's your favorite series? What's your favorite flower? What's your favorite blah, 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 blah kind of thing. Favorite series, Downton Abbey. I know a guy. Downloaded Downton Abbey. I won't say how, but I got it. I know a guy. Her favorite flowers were peonies. I thought that was a dog, but it was a peony. So I walked into a florist. I said, do you have any peonies? They looked at me. They said, no, it's a peony. The most expensive flower in the world. I have this very bad, talking about money matters and bad financial habits. One of my bad financial habits is I often don't ask the price. Or Pips, I'll come home with something and Pips will be like, how much did that cost? And I say, I have no idea. I just bought it, like the milk, or you know what I mean? Like that's something that I have to consistently work on. So I didn't ask how much they were. I just said, can I have 3 bunches of peonies? Yes, go boy. You know why? Love gives. Love gives. And giving is good for you. Social science today tells us that generous people are happier, healthier, with lower anxiety, they have better relationships, they have higher life expectancy, and giving causes the body to well up with happiness in a way that very few other things do. We are biologically wired for generosity. The dopamine kick we get from giving is one of the highest kicks of dopamine. That is just how we are wired. We were made in the image of God. Love gives. We were made to give. Not just our finances, but we were made to live lives of giving and generosity. In Acts 20, verse 35, remembering the words of Jesus himself, it is more blessed to give than receive. It is more blessed to give than to receive. But can we be honest? Just put a little T-Rex hand up. It's also nice to receive, eh? Hey, it's nice to receive. But we all know that feeling when we've given something, given someone something, given them. We walk away, it feels good. Anyone not feel good after giving something to someone, being generous? The only person we don't feel good giving to is SARS. Even Jesus has something to say about that. So this morning, I want to just unpack very quickly. I want to talk about tithing. I want to talk about what that means for us as individuals, as a local church. And for some of us, this is like oh no, it's the T word. But this morning, we're going to just get into this and we're going to just unpack it. And we're going to continue to move in this series of Money Matters, putting God first. We've already talked about the fact that everything comes from God, that it is all His. Genesis told us that we were stewards. It tells us that we are stewards of creation. Nothing is ours. No one here is the owner of anything. Everything is God's. We are simply stewards of what He has given us. And that includes our finances, that includes our homes, that includes our families. Everything belongs to God. This creation is His, and He has given us the mandate from the garden is to steward, to care for, to cultivate what is His. Understanding that something is not yours is a very freeing thing, because I know what it's like to go and buy something for someone with a whole bunch of other people's money. Much easier, hey? It's much easier. And so if we can just understand that the money is God's, hey, it's His. Much easier for us to let go if it's not ours. So that's what we've spoken about. Last week we spoke about the importance of storing, not for the fact that it gathers moths and rust and all that kind of stuff. Giving so that we are able to be generous participants in the kingdom throughout our lives. Putting in place some plans that we can consistently invest into God's kingdom. So let's start. 2 Corinthians 8, 1 and 2. And now, dear brothers and sisters, I'm reading from the NIV. We want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. I want you to underline that grace. I want you to circle it, and I want you to take note of it, because it's a very important word. It's the same word that John in 1 John verse 17, where it says, the law indeed was given through Moses, grace and truth. It's the same word from the verse before, where grace is used. This is not just like a little bit of grace. This is grace. This is grace. And so God has taught, this is Paul saying, grace that has been given to the Macedonian church by God. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. Paul is talking to Gentiles about Gentiles. He's talking to the church. Whoopsie daisy, sorry. He's writing to the Corinthians, and he's talking to them about the Macedonians, and he is raving about them. He's like, you guys have got to check these oaks out. These oaks are so generous. And you know what? They have no reason to be generous, because it's a disaster there financially. It's a disaster. It's a recession. It's an absolute disaster. They're doing all these things in that area. Nothing's working. Financially, the economy is tanked. They're paying 60% tariffs. It's a disaster. This is not people that are obligated by the law. This is not a bunch of, he's not talking about a bunch of Jews. He's talking about Gentiles. He's not talking about a group of people that have been brought up in a tradition culture where you gave 10% like the Jews did, the tithe. It's not that. He's talking to a group of people that have been completely freed by the grace of Jesus, completely liberated by the cross, and yet despite that, despite there not being any word or vocab in their lives for this giving of 10%, they are radically, irrationally giving to a point where it does not make sense. It simply does not make sense. And he's like, you got to come check this. This is crazy. This is crazy. The Macedonians were very poor, but they were irrationally generous. In fact, they were so poor, the word there is they were poor as deep as the ocean poor. That's how poor they were. This wasn't just like, oh man, I have to give up Netflix for a couple months to catch up on some stuff. This was like deep as the ocean poor. They were going through a tough time, and yet they were joyful. Isn't that interesting? And yet they were joyful. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. There was joy in hardship, and there was generosity in the environment of poverty. In their state of poverty, they were generous, and in their suffering, they were filled with joy. I just think we could preach a whole sermon on that. What a wonderful lesson. Why? Because of the grace that God had given them. The grace that God had given the Macedonian churches. This unbelievable ability to be generous. And so Paul is writing to the Corinthians to tell them about this. So why were they so generous? Yes, it's the grace of God. But why were they so generous? You see, many of us don't have a money problem. We have a mindset, heart problem. That's what we have. A cool dude called Craig Groeschel talks about two types of mindsets when it comes to finances, and I want to actually say two types of hearts when it comes to finances. The one kind of heart is, we'd call it the bag. Everybody say the bag. Now write it down, the bag. The bag heart. The bag heart, this is from Haggai 1 verse 6. This is to explain what a bag mindset and heart is. You've planted much but harvested little. You eat but you never have enough. You drink but you never have your fill. You put on clothes but you never warm. You earn wages only to put them in your purse with holes in it. Hey? Anybody feeling Haggai 1:6-ish this morning? It's the bag. In other words, we don't have enough. I would like to give, I just don't have enough. When I win that money, it's coming. I just want to very lovingly say, if that's something that you've said, and I know I've said it, the chances of you giving when the money comes are very slim. Because as humans, think my dad said, we hold on to money like holding on to discipline, swimming across a swimming pool, and that discipline is perfectly intact by the time we get to the other side of the swimming pool. And so the bag mindset is simply this: we don't have enough. If I have more, I'll give more. But right now, this is what I've got. My barn is empty. I just need to focus on, a few things here at home. The second type of heart, the second type of mindset is called the barn. The barn mindset, a barn, a farming barn, a barn filled with grain. And this is a mindset, this is a heart that it says, I have more than enough. Deuteronomy 28 verse 8 explains this beautifully. In the NIV it says, our barns are full and we are ready to give. And that's how the Macedonians lived. Their barns were full and they were ready to give. Even though no one could understand how their barns could be full, they still gave. The barn mindset, and that's what they had. That's what we're called to have as Jesus followers, a barn mindset. You know who had a barn mindset? Joe. We spoke about him last week. He filled those barns so beautifully that there was so much to give. Joe. Sorry. I thought we were down with him, Joseph. So let me just explain what happens when we have a bag mindset. This is what happens. We know that everything comes from God, eh? So God supplies it. This is what happens. We consume it. Therefore, we end up lacking it. And then we end up fearing the lack. And so when we have that bag mindset, we have that thing. It's just going to go, God's giving me my money. Thank you, Jesus, for my money. I'm going to give this, whatever I can give. It's not everything I can give, Lord. But we end up consuming it. We end up eating it. We end up lacking. We end up fearing. But when the barn mindset, when we understand that the barn is full and we have plenty to give and we are ready to give now, like the Macedonians were, we understand that God supplies, He supplies. We understand where the harvest comes from. And that, I think, is such a cool thing. In Proverbs 3, verses 9 and 10, I'm just going to turn there quickly because I don't want to summarize it. It says this: then your barns will be filled to overflowing and your vats will brim over with new wine. Then it says, verse 9 says, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing and your vats will brim over with new wine. The barn mindset, the barn heart is a heart that understands a biblical principle of first fruits. First fruits. That we give our best and our first. And that is where we enter into the realm of tithing, that language. That's where we enter into the realm of tithing. The first fruits, in before the law, it was 10%. It was Abraham and Joseph, they gave 10%, and Jacob, they gave 10%, okay, out of gratitude. It wasn't in the law yet. It was pre-law. Then the law came in and it became an official 10%. One of the GOAT scriptures, one of the greatest of all time scriptures on tithing is Malachi 3, 6-10. It says this: I, the Lord, do not change, so you, the descendants of Jacob, are not destroyed. Ever since that time of your ancestors, you have turned away from my decrees, you have not kept them. Return to me and I will return to you, says the Lord Almighty. And again, return to me and I'll return to you. There's a principle of sowing and reaping. That's the principle of sowing and reaping. But you ask, how will we return? Bag mindset. I don't have enough money. How do we return this? This is what God says. Will a mere mortal rob God, yet you rob me? But you ask, how are we robbing you? In tithes and offerings. You are under a curse, your whole nation, because you are robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me on this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be enough room to store it. Malachi 3, 6-10. Now that's quite hectic because there's there's a curse in there. It's quite hectic. So what we've got to understand is this is the law. This is the law. This was the rule. This was the obligation to the people of Israel. This is what they had to do. This is the only time that God asks us to test Him. He wants us, test me with your first and your best. But I don't have 10% to give. I just don't have. Well, we've started using this phrase here because we think it's very helpful. Let's just get the needle closer to 10. Not let's get to 10%, not let's be legalistic and tick the box of, let's tithe like they tithed under the law. No, let's understand what is ours as God's. Let's give him what he deserves. Let's give out of gratitude. Let's give him increasingly. Let's try and just increase what we give him. Let's just shift the needle towards 10. In other words, it's quite difficult to rearrange our entire lives around God, but that's what he calls us to do as his people. And so we have this wrestling match inside of us. Yeah, but tithing's Old Testament law. Is tithing valid in the New Testament, in this world that we live, in this new covenant? I think it is. I think it's relevant. I think we are no longer under the law when it comes to being made right with God. That curse of death was removed by the cross. We are free from the consequences of death. But on the other hand, the law was not only about making people right with God, it was also about helping his people live full and fruitful lives. Don't eat unclean meat. He wasn't being a bacon party pooper. If you ate pigs in those days, chances are you'd get very sick and you'd die. There were dietary requirements, all sorts of things that God put in place into the law to help his people live full and fruitful lives. And some of those principles are equally relevant today. Some of those laws we should follow them. Like don't murder. I don't think the New Testament makes that irrelevant. Hey, any moms and dads? Hey, anybody go, no, you know what, children, don't honor me like the commandments say because we're in the New Testament. No, not at all. We have to critically think about this. We have to understand and not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have to understand there's a principle here of giving with gratitude. There's a principle here of giving God what is already his. And if Abraham did it before the law and Jesus came to fulfill the law and we no longer live under the law, we still called to give God what is his. In all the things that Jesus spoke about, we know he spoke about money a lot. I think pastors, we love to say that, Money is important. He spoke about that. I think it's second most that he spoke about money. It was a big deal. Why? Mammon is a god. Very important for us to remember that. Mammon is a god and he wants to take us down with him. Okay, it's important. But Jesus never once asked for money. He mentions the tithe once. Barely once. Maybe even there's suggestions of like hinting to other things. He talks about it. Because he wasn't after our money, he was after our hearts. So when we talk about tithing, this is not about your money, this is about your heart. When we talk about generosity, this is not about filling up a coffer, this is about your heart. This is about, can you live like loose change in God's pocket? Can you live with open hands? Are you willing to let God do with you what he wants to do with you? Or are we holding on tightly to who we are and defining who we are with our time, our talents, and our treasure? Are we not allowing God to get into those spaces he needs to get into to exercise his calling into our lives so that the world would come to know the main thing, which that there's a solution to the problem that this world is facing. His name is Jesus. That issue of sin that's taking everybody away from spending eternity with the Father, guess what? There's a solution. His name is Jesus. His name is Jesus. And the reality is, in the world we live in, telling people about Jesus, there are some costs involved in that process, are there not? Hey? I mean, I need a helicopter. I'm joking. That's what some pastors say. I'm saying, we need to invest into God's kingdom. We need to invest into God's kingdom. He's after our hearts. Matthew 22, 37 and 38 says, Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Love gives. Mark 7 verse 6 says, he replied, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites, as it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. The heart was very important to Jesus. The heart was more important than money. You know why? Because the heart leads to everything else. The heart leads to everything else. If the focus is money, if the focus is money and only money, it's only going to focus on the things that money can buy. And yes, money, I don't believe people say that money can't buy happiness. Of course, money can buy happiness. I mean, it must be nice to wake up not stressed financially on a monthly basis. I'm just being very honest with you, hey? Hey, it must be nice to wake up and go, hey, I've got a X amount of cash left over in my bank account this month. Praise the Lord. That's a reality. It's a reality. We need to understand that it's awesome. It's awesome. Can we just be honest for a moment? Money's nice. It's just the problem is, what's the route to that money? That's where the problem comes in. That's why some people end up dying alone with no family and a massive trust fund. It's because they made money the main thing, not their heart. And so money is wonderful if it is used in the right hands, with the right heart. Money destroys lives if it is in hearts that are wicked. Okay, Matthew 23, verse 23. This is a good one. This is Jesus. I feel like he's a little grumpy. Okay? So I'm going to be really cheerful. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your herb gardens, but you ignore the more important aspects of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. You should tithe, yes, but do not neglect the more important things. 10%. 10%. Tithe. 10%. That's what the tithe means, 10%. In other words, you are careful to tithe the least that is required of you. I've coached. Anybody here that's ever coached or anybody watched your child in the team that's coached, you very quickly see the kid that does the bare minimum and the kid that puts in the extra hours. Very quickly can see it. In fact, the greatest of all time, the Messis, the Ronaldos, the Tiger Woodses, the Jordans, the Moes, the Taines, the greatest of all time athletes, the Steve Talbots. What separates them is just going over and above the bare minimum. They didn't just rock up to training. They either arrived hours before training. In fact, you can go read all of those autobiographies. I guarantee they all have one thing in common. When other people talk about them, when they went into training, those guys were already there. When they left training, those guys were still there. I don't want to live a bare minimum life. And that's what irritated Jesus about the Pharisees. They were doing the bare minimum because they could just tick a box, because the law is about just ticking a box. Jesus calls us to give not out of obligation. Jesus sets us free from that obligation. Give because love gives. Give because it's first fruits. Give because it's already God's. But you could say, Matt, but Jesus is talking to a bunch of Pharisees. He's talking to the group of people where it was almost a cultural tradition. It was you tithed as a Jew, you tithed 10% of your stuff to God. What about those that are free from the law, like us in Durban in 2025? Well, the answer is the Macedonians that Paul is writing about. They were giving extravagantly. They were giving irrationally. So we can either give the bare minimum or we can give irrationally generously, like the Macedonians were. So the tithe, very quickly, the tithe was to support the priests and the Levites because the temple needed to be looked after and God's work needed to be done. It was to help fund the temple and to provide for the poor and the needy. And the tithe is an Old Testament idea that was carried into the medieval United Kingdom, Britain area, where what would happen is there would be a tithe barn. Okay, a tithe barn. And this tithe barn was basically when the little priest for the little area, everybody would bring their grain and their whatever they needed for that parish guy to survive and his family to survive if they had a wife. I didn't think they had wives in those days. And basically that's what happened, the tithe barn. And then they would survive, the priests, the clergy would survive off the tithe barn. And then that kind of, as the Britain was, which really was the central kind of space of civilization at that point, it really entered deep into popular consciousness. And there was a shift from agricultural to finances, the way the world worked, which translated from agriculture to finances. And this is what N.T. Wright says: the tithe is not mandated in the New Testament. It's not mandated. It's not a law. It's not something that you have to do. Jesus refers to it in Matthew 23 that we've just read. And this is what Matthew 23 is saying. I'm going to read it again. It says here, "You are careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your herb gardens, but you ignore the more important aspects of the law: justice, mercy, and faith. You should tithe, yes, but do not neglect the more important things." This is what that's saying. Of course you will be giving. That's what it says. Of course you must give. But the tithe is a pointer towards the generosity that is expected of you. The tithe points to the generosity that is expected of you as a child of God, as a steward, as someone who lives the first fruit life, as someone who understands that their wealth is not their own but God's. In other words, you are free to give more. This is what Tim Keller says, a very clever dude in the USA. He says this: the Old Testament called believers to tithe, to give 10% of their income. The New Testament nowhere explicitly requires tithing. But in Matthew 23, verse 23, Jesus criticizes the Pharisees for not being willing to go beyond the tithe when the community were in need. This means that while the church cannot require members to give any particular amount of money, in other words, in this church, you are not disqualified, you are not kicked out, it's not a requirement of membership, it's not an obligation that we chase you down the street with the barge pole. Jesus assumes his followers will simply go beyond the tithe with giving. So the tithe is the minimum rule of thumb for Christians who want to live in a gospel way to the church, the poor, and others. Anyone want to tithe 10%? No, I want to tithe 10%. 10% is enough for me. It's in my budget. But there's a difference between ticking a box religiously, jumping through a hoop, and then just going on with your life, as opposed to living a life that is just shrouded and covered and immersed in generosity. In 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, Paul doesn't mention tithing, and that's the scripture that we've started with and we're going to end with, and that's what we stood and read this morning. He doesn't mention tithing. He does insist on generosity. Freely you receive, freely you give. The point of tithing is pointing towards generosity. So we need to be released from a legalistic, you must pay 10%, otherwise you're going to get hit with a stick. But that doesn't mean that you don't give much. And that doesn't mean you don't give generously. It is, in fact, it is assumed that you're giving more. Don't let the right hand know what the left hand is doing. We know people. Our folks have been in this game for a long time. Some of you guys have been in this church game for a long time. It's very easy and quickly to spot somebody who likes to let you know, hey, listen, you want my tithe? Well, how's about a parking spot? You laugh. You want my tithe? I'd like a cappuccino. Like Quinton. This is what Quinton's like. He's not like threatening us with his tithe. He walks in and says, can I have a phone, please? It's like, you want my tithe? You want my money? I want everybody to know that I'm paying 10%. I'm paying my tithe. I'm doing what is required by the law. All I'm trying to say is Jesus broke that and asks for more. He asks us for more. Because if we give more, we're not bound by the box. We're liberated by the cross. We're not bound by ticking the box. We're liberated by the cross. And in Malachi, that very hectic verse that talks about cursing, what we do with that is we kind of turn it into transactional stuff. If I give God this, then He's going to give me that. Transactional. Let me just go, beep, cool beans. I'm going to be good this week, God, and I'm going to pay my tithe. And this week, I'd like that neighbor to be taken out, please. And I'd like that raise. And I'd like this. Thank you very much. I'll see you next week at our next contract discussion. And transactional living is exactly what pagans do and what they did. It was, I'm going to make a sacrifice to the God of rain, and by that sacrifice, it's going to rain on my crops. That is that mindset. We don't have a transactional relationship with God. That plays into the glorification of money and the glorification of mammon. God is not transactional. It's not how He works. He loves everybody the same. He loves everybody the same. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, God makes the sun rise on the just and unjust and sends rain on all people alike. So tithing predates the law in terms of giving 10%. Giving 10% predates the law. The law made tithing a rule. The cross turns it back into an act of worship of gratitude. But I don't need a tithe. It's outdated. It's so old. Well, let me just be honest with you. If God's kingdom is still advancing and His people are still gathering and His house still needs building, your treasure still needs investing. I'm going to say that again. If God's kingdom is still advancing and His people are still gathering and His house still needs building, your treasure still needs investing. Yeah, but Matt, but I don't want to tithe. You don't have to tithe. You get to tithe. You don't have to worship God. You get to worship God. You are not obligated. You are not forced. There is no gun to your head here. This is a reality of an expression of a Christ-centered life. Honest time for us, Vineyard Church Durban. Honest time. If you're struggling to let go of the cash, who is the center of your life? If you're struggling to loosen the grip of your financial expectations for your life and you're caught in a consistent cycle of can't get out of this bag mindset, this bag heart mentality, you have to ask yourself, is Jesus sitting on your throne? Because this is all about Jesus. When Jesus walks into the room, people give. Not just their money, they give their lives. They give their everything. And that's what this is about. This is not about the word tithe. This is not about the 10%. This is a posture of a heart that is ready to admit to the King of all kings, it's yours, have it. How can you use me more? How can you use me more? This is not an obligation. This is not a rule. This is not a requirement for membership. It is an expression of gratitude and worship. Why? Because love gives. Love gives. So the Macedonians were a great example of irrational generosity. In verses 3 to 5, this is what Paul says, "For I testify that they gave as much as they were able." As much as they were able. Friends, that's not 10%. I can tell you right now, that's not 10%. As much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in the service of the Lord's people. They went and they said, we want to give, we want in, we want to give. How can we get involved in this? We want to give to this thing of the advancement of God's kingdom. And they exceeded our expectations, Paul said. They exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God, also to us. They gave themselves. They gave themselves. I'm going to say it again. They gave themselves to the Lord, and then by the will of God, to us also. You know that moment when you are picking teams for sports? Or when you're picking, no, let me use another example. You know when you are picking from a group of kids to come and do an example, and they're like, pick me, pick me, pick me, pick me, pick me, pick me. That's the Macedonians. You know what happens when we go, pick me, Jesus, pick me, use my money. I don't have much. Here, pick me. Guess what? He uses us. He uses us. It's those of us in the back that are slinking with our wallets in our pocket. In fact, we've left our wallet at home because we know what's coming at church. And we're like, hey, don't make eye contact. Hey, but I'm just not feeling connected to the Lord, guys. It's because you're not letting Him use you. You're not giving Him all of yourself. They gave beyond their ability. They urgently wanted in. They saw it as a privilege. They exceeded all expectations. Why? Because love gives. Barn mindset. I have enough to give right now. I have enough to give right now. Now, I just want to be very practical as I start to wrap up. Just very, very practical. You have to give what you have. You can't give from debt. Let's just get practical. There's no point in you saying, oh, we're going to go, we're raising some cash. Please, guys, let's put some cash in the tin. Okay, let me just take out, I'm going to give 10,000 Rand. Praise the Lord. From my credit card. Don't do that. It's not your money. That's the bank's money. You're giving Mammon's money into the offering, friends. That's why this series, Money Matters, we're wanting to be really practical about this. We're talking about budgets coming up. We have to be able to budget, put in place some very real financial mechanisms and processes and systems into our lives so we don't get home shopping and your wife asks you, how much did that cost? And you go, I don't know. Like I do sometimes. But we know where our money is. We understand it's not in the dark. You know, friends, Mammon likes to keep things hidden. Mammon makes financial conversations between husbands and wives and children and parents difficult, hidden, secret conversations that no one wants to talk about. Jesus shines a light on that because giving is joyful, because love gives. Finances should be a joyful conversation in our homes. We shouldn't dread talking about money. Why? Because we maybe don't have a budget, so we've maybe overspent. We've got that app on our phone where it's just like $50 for those gems for that game, but then 5 months later, you've realized how much money you've spent on something on your phone. Or you've signed up for a free membership and you've forgotten, so you now, happened to me, I had to cancel it. I don't know what I was even a member of, or some like worship chord thing, and I had to pay. I was like, jeepers, these guys are clever. Mammon is sneaky. Mammon is sneaky. 2 Corinthians 9 verses 8 says, and God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. In other words, more than enough. In other words, there is more than enough. We had a friend years ago, her name was Denise. She got from Denise Stone, friends of ours in England. They're a crazy English pastoral couple. We just love them. Mad as hatters. And if you're watching this, you will agree with me, Denise. And she stood up here, and I just never forget that. She's like, guys, we need to give. You know what? He's got so much money up there. I love that. There is more than enough. The creator of heavens and earth. Do you think he said, let there be light, and he didn't have the credit facility to back that up? Do you really think he was going to raise a son from the dead and not be able to provide a little bit of cash? Do you think he was able to oversee the miracles of dead coming to life and blind being seen and not be able to provide some cash to make some stuff happen? Because let's be real, money makes the world go round. Urban Ignition costs a lot of money. You have to hire buses. Why? You have to get a whole bunch of kids from point A to point B, because going to point B outside of their homes and families and normal environments, point B enables them to be in a space where they can just maybe hear Jesus in a different environment, come back changed, and a whole bunch of the young guys in this room today are fruit of that. It's a reality. Money makes things happen. And so this morning, I want to just encourage us. I really want to encourage us. Don't be scared of this word tithe. And I'm saying this as a pastor. I'm saying this as part of the team here. We're not throwing an obligation on you. We're not throwing a requirement here. We're encouraging you. Live a Jesus-centered life. Live a life where you have a barn mindset, where you understand that you can give now. If you can't give because stuff's not in order, then we want to help you put stuff in order. Next week, we're going to start talking about making some opportunities available with some of our financial wizards in this church for you to come in a shame-free environment, bring your debt, and we will help you figure out a plan to sort that out. We'll help you. We'll help you get out of debt. Not financially. We'll help you get out of debt with some structures and disciplines. We all need that help. It's a reality of living on this earth, is we all need help following Jesus. So if we can follow Jesus in this realm, we can. So I just want to say, love gives. So how's your giving? Not just your money. How's your giving of your time? How's your giving of your gifts, your talents? How's the giving? How's the giving? I often I've told this story before. I just want to. We sometimes just need a moment where it just makes sense for us. I had that moment when I was in grade 4. I was in a school that was not necessarily going the right way, and my folks had seen this. And it's a pastor's family. It's it's not like let's send him to Hilton. It's not like that. It's like, I mean, I would have, actually, no, I wouldn't have wanted to go to Hilton. I broke the school bell at Hilton, just in case you want to know, by mistake at a wedding once. Pulled the whole thing down the chapel. Never admitted it, but now it's on camera so they can come find me. So I was in grade 4, and it was very real to me that I was going to be changing schools. And I went for an interview at the new school, which is a very good school. Had a meeting with the headmaster, and it was a very good school, so therefore there was a big waiting list, and there was, like, I don't want to exaggerate, but I know there was at least 50 people ahead of me on the queue. I think it was more than that. I think it was maybe even 100, but 50, let's just be conservative, people ahead of me in the queue. And that's like basically 2.5 classes of people that have to leave the school for you to join the school. I mean, it's impossible. And I remember hearing that as a little grade 4 and going, okay, this is interesting. And weirdly, we went to Musgrave Centre, and in those days, don't know what year it was, in those days, 10 Rand was like a lot of money. Like, I think 10 Rand was like 100 Rand now. I literally, like, it was like amazing. You're 10 Rand. My parents gave me 10 Rand. You can buy anything you want at Musgrave Centre today, Matt. 10 Rand. Here we go. Here's a gift. We love you. I don't know if they had picked up that maybe I was feeling anxious about school situations, or maybe they just were being, let's just give them 10 Rand. Doesn't really matter. I just remember walking around holding this 10 Rand going, nothing is good enough for me here, man. Nothing is good enough for me. I was like, no, I don't want to buy that. Don't want to buy that. And, I could just buy chocolates, but then my dad's going to eat them. It's like, all of these type of things. And as we came out of Musgrave Centre, I remember clear as day, I closed my eyes, I can still see the man. There was a man sitting there. He had like a red cap. He had a guitar that he had been playing earlier. He was disabled and he was begging for money. And I remember, clear as day, as a little grade 4 Matt, I remember instantly knowing I need to give this guy my 10 Rand. And I know as a parent, there's nothing more irritating than giving your kid something nice and then that kid wants to give it away to someone else. It's irritating. It's also wonderful. So my folks were like, are you sure you want to do this? And I was like, no, I'm sure I want to do this. Gave him my 10 Rand, walked away, didn't think anything of it. A week goes by, another week goes by. Get home from school, I can check my mom's buzzing, my dad's, hey Matt, we got some good news. You've been accepted to go to the school. And in that moment, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that giving 10 Rand had something to do with getting into a new school. I just knew. I didn't give so that I could get into a new school. I wasn't being an obligation or ticking a box to try and manipulate God. I just knew, instantly understood in that moment, you reap what you sow. Instantly, and since then, I have remained steadfast in my belief that giving God about 10% of my income on a monthly basis is not an obligation. It's not a trap. It's not the church manipulating me. It's worship to my King. It's letting him know that I know that this money is not mine, but it's yours. It's a gift from you, Father. Thank you so much. I even went through a season where on my budget, I took tithe out of expense and wrote worship because I was getting trapped. It's just an expense. Let me just in fact, so you don't have to do this. This is just me. I don't do my tithe via a scheduled payment because I take time and I say, Lord, thank you for what you're giving me. And I press pay. It's an act of worship. It's gratitude. It's an understanding that what I have is his. And I want to encourage you this morning. You can test God on this because his principles last. He doesn't just change his mind. I've got story after story of young person in our church that have been on this journey, financial journey. And if Cade was here, I'd get him to share the story. He goes, Matt, tithing works, eh? Wow. Not because we give to get, because God is a God who honors the principles of sowing and reaping. He's a God who's generous. He's a God who wants us to flourish. And I want to encourage you this morning as we continue the series on finances, on money matters. I want to encourage you to start having tough conversations with yourself about what is your budget looking like, and are you returning to God what is His? Not from an obligation, not as a requirement of membership, not because you have to do it, otherwise bad you, but because if Jesus is centered to your life, He matters more than the money does. So why don't you test Him on that and see what breaks in your life? It's in here. It's in here. Let's stand.